Good evening, everybody. I'm Reverend Liz Walker. I'm pastor of Roxbury Presbyterian Church, and I'm the executive director of the Cory Program for Post-Traumatic Healing. Welcome to the fifth installment of our series on coping in this season of COVID-19. In just, a week, vaccines will be made available to the general public. The good news is that there's a growing number of people who are taking the vaccines, at least that's good news for me, all over the country. But of course, there is still a lot of skepticism in communities where people of color live. And people are skeptical still about taking the vaccine. So tonight, we want to respectfully address that. A few house rules. This event is called Can We Talk? And for those of you who are typically with us on our weekly Can We Talk events, which involve dealing with our trauma in our community, that we know that includes music and movement and the sharing of stories. But tonight, in addressing this critical subject, we want to change that format. So here's how we're going to do it tonight, a little different from what we normally do. We're going to hear three specific stories from members of our community at the Cory Program off the top. And after each story, our panelists will answer questions around those different experiences. But after the third story, and we talk about that specific experience, we will open it up so that everybody on this Zoom line can ask questions. And you put your questions in the chat line. I believe, Judelle, that's how we're going to do it tonight. Are we going to put the questions in the chat line?
Yes.
So that we then can repeat the questions and get them to our panelists. We want to be very brief, and we want to get to the answers so that people can be heard, and so we can discuss this very critical information. So even for the three stories that we hear at the beginning, we've allotted about 3 minutes. And if you go over the 3 minutes, I am going to gently and lovingly give you a signal that you've gone over time. And this is only so that everybody who's a part of this conversation tonight can have the opportunity to talk. This is an exciting night for me because we're doing something different. We are hearing from our community first before we give questions and answers or suggestions. My co-host tonight, my sister who's been on this journey with me from the very beginning, Reverend Dr. Gloria White-Hammond, who is co-pastor of Bethel AME Church. She, of course, is a medical doctor. She is a member of the Mayor's Task Force on Healthcare Equity, and she is a Swartz resident practitioner and ministry studies at Harvard Divinity School. And joining us to address your concerns, Reverend Gloria, always glad to be with you on this event. Joining us to address your concerns about the vaccine tonight, Dr. Simone Wiles, who is an infectious disease physician at South Shore Hospital, a member of the Governor's Working Group on Vaccine Distribution, a clinical assistant professor of medicine at Tufts Medical Center, and chair of the Committee on Diversity with Massachusetts Medical Society. Welcome, Dr. Wiles. Good to see you. And we're also honored to welcome Dr. Cassandra Pierre, who is an assistant professor at the Boston University School of Medicine. She serves as a medical director of public health programs and the acting hospital epidemiologist at Boston Medical Center. And all three of our panelists, welcome tonight, have much more on their that they've done in this world, but we wanted to get right to the question. So we welcome all three of you. The three members of the Cory Program are going to speak now, and you'll notice that I'm only going to give their first names, and that is not out of disrespect, but we really kind of pride ourselves in honoring people's privacy. And so we're going to begin with Ramona, and Ramona's going to tell us a little bit about her process, her decision on the virus, where you are. Welcome, Ramona, and thank you so much for sharing tonight. You want to tell your story?
Thank you for having me here. So I was very hesitant about getting the vaccine because I heard so many bad things of what's happening when people are getting the vaccine and they pass away and stuff. So I was kind of scared I was really scared. I was anxious. I was trying to ask questions and stuff to find out more about it and stuff. what was in the vaccine. So I finally got a chance to ask my question. So where I work from an agency. So the RN at my agency, I asked her, I said, you know, I have all these health problems. I have problem with my heart. I have asthma. And I says, I have fatigue. So I was like, but I'm really scared. So I was telling my children and them, I was like, well, if I get the vaccine and something happens to me, you all are okay. You all know what to do and stuff. So after that, my kids were like, Ma, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. So finally, with my anxiety, my psychiatrist called me and he said, what's happening? I said, I'm really anxious about this vaccine. I keep having on my mind that I'm going to get it and I'm going to die. So he says to me, he said, Ramona, you're going to be okay because you really need that vaccine. Because if you don't get it, you're not going to be able to hug your grandkids or hug your children. So I was like, yeah, but I heard so much about it. He said, but you can't really rely on what you hear on Facebook or in the news or on TV or even just walking around. He says, you have to protect yourself and plus protect others. So after I had that conversation with him, I ended up getting the first vaccine. My arm was sore and everything. I was tired. I was a little fatigued, but I was okay after a couple of days. So then after that, I was like, oh, okay, I can do the next one. So I was talking to other people about how I was going to get the next one and stuff. And they're like, well, I'm scared. And I'm like, you know what? It's really not bad. You really don't feel it. I says, but you want to be able to go to parties with other people, be around your family and stuff. That will protect you. So once I started talking about that, they was like, well, let me see. Because I was really hesitant about taking it. I was really hesitant because I was really scared. But, you know, and I talked to God a lot about it and he has control. So once I got the third vaccine, I was tired, fatigued a little bit, but I'm okay and I'm not going to die. So I hope other people will listen to my story and decide to get the vaccine. It's up to you. It's, you know, thank you.
Thank you very much. And you brought up some really interesting questions, especially about worrying about what's in it. Reverend Gloria, do you have a question for one of our doctors
Sure.
based on what you heard Ramona say?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much, Ramona. Appreciate your sharing your story and such courage. I'm inspired just hearing your story. And I do have a question. There are a number of people in our community who have multiple illnesses and all at the same time. As you heard, Ramona has both asthma, cardiac disease, a number of challenges. Is it, how does the vaccine impact people who have multiple conditions at one time?
Yeah, so I'm happy to start. I also thank Ramona for her story. I think there was a number of things. Hearing her reminded me of speaking to my mom and other people in her prayer group who have the same questions. And I'm really glad to be here tonight to hear these stories and be part of this. So yes, hearing Ramona, thinking about what she was saying about her underlying conditions, we know that that is actually what puts people at highest risk. That is the fear that I have. In terms of who is at highest risk for developing the severe complications of COVID. And hearing that concern on the one side, the fear of COVID on the other side, the fear of what could happen with the unknown, the vaccines, is just so compelling. But we know that these vaccines, all three that have the emergency use authorization, the Moderna, the Pfizer, and the Johnson & Johnson, have been tested in people with underlying conditions. And even more than that, now have been out in the world among millions of people who have these underlying conditions and have served them well and have functioned well. And we have not heard any safety considerations from people with these underlying conditions.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Wiles, is there any medical condition that would keep a person from taking the vaccine right now?
Reverend Liz, thank you so much for having me. And I also was touched by Ramona's story. And again, my mom had some of those fears. So it was nice to really listen to her story and see her come out on the other side getting the vaccine. But to answer your question, there is no specific illness that would prevent you from getting the vaccine. the main thing that we tell people is if you're allergic to any of the components of the vaccine, then you might want to first talk with your doctor about it before you go ahead and get the vaccine. But really, if you have any of the like diabetes, heart disease, cancer, those are not reasons for you to say you should not get the vaccine. In fact, given those underlying conditions, you absolutely want to get the vaccine, just as Dr. Pear has mentioned.
Okay, thank you both. And Ramona, if you have any questions, we're going to allow you to ask them in a few minutes. I just wanted to make sure our other panelists get to tell their story. So we will have questions and answers in a few minutes. Hope is the second person. No, Prentice, I believe, is our second panelist who's going to speak. Prentice, would you like to share your story, please? And thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Reverend Liz. Hello, everybody. Like Ramona, I was, hesitant about getting the vaccine. And I think a lot of that comes from, we talk a lot about generational trauma when it comes to African Americans in the medical community. And we always think back to the over 5,000 women who were forced sterilization, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Or we think about the Tuskegee experiment, where over 500 Black men were not only given the syphilis virus, but it was left untreated for the duration. If you know anything about syphilis, the end results is disfigurement and insanity. So that just shows what we think about, how humane the medical community is for us. That being said, I work in the community. And I believe in moving past my fears. And I see that, COVID-19 is affecting everybody. It's affected our whole world, not just us, but the whole world. And I want to move past this. And I had some close calls at work. One of the recovery centers that I work out of, there was an outbreak there. But, and I even had some symptoms, and I don't know if it was psychosomatic or what, but every time I went to go get tested, I tested negative. So I made the decision that I was going to get the vaccination, but I was going to wait. Because in my mind, I'm never first in line for nothing but the bank or a free lunch, But the psychiatric hospital that I worked for, as soon as the vaccine broke, it was in January, they got a batch, and I was given the opportunity to get vaccinated, and I was still hesitant because but I might not be able to get it later on. The spirit told me, go ahead and get it. You're going to be all right, and this is the right thing to do. A lot of that I think had to do. I don't know anything, but I remember reading in biology class about RNA as opposed to DNA. And it's not like the measles virus or the chickenpox virus where they give you an inoculation with the virus in it and your body develops antibodies. RNA is more like a memory, and it's more like they're injecting a memory into your body, and then your body reacts on that memory. So it seems, plus like the doctor said before, this has been tested for so many people, and it seems so effective. It seems like these old fears don't make sense anymore in the day and age we live in. At some point, we have to sort of let those go and put our hat in the ring with everybody else. That's all I really got. Thank you, guys, and everybody be safe.
Thank you. Gloria, did you have a question?
I sure do. And again, I want to thank you, Prentice, for sharing that story. We're really encouraged by the fact that you've gotten the vaccine and that you're encouraging other people to get it. You're one of the questions that I have is we talk with people in the community. There are some people who think, well, they can't get COVID-19. They're not going to bother to get the vaccine because they're not going to get COVID-19. Maybe they think only old people get COVID-19. Is that true that there are some people who aren't as susceptible to the disease?
I'll take that one first. So as I tell everyone, COVID is no respecter of persons. So rich, poor, Black, white, healthy, have some underlying conditions, you could get COVID. And the only way we're going to be able to get rid of COVID is trying to get as many people vaccinated as possible, along with taking all the public health measures until we get to a point where we get to herd immunity. But for right now, I think the key point is that we want to get many people vaccinated. And I'm really just grateful for Prentice's story, for sharing his fears and really moving beyond the fear, because what he talked about were some really important points that, you know, a lot of members of the Black and Brown community have dealt with. It's the trauma. And so we're trying to get beyond that. And it's really great to hear him moving to the point where he's comfortable getting the vaccine. So very happy to hear his story and such an encouragement for all of us.
Absolutely. Dr. Pierre, another question that we hear kind of on the same line that Gloria brought up is that people think that if they've already had COVID-19, there's no need to take the virus. I don't know what's the answer to that? Is that true? If I already have had COVID-19, am I immune?
No, unfortunately, and we've seen cases of reinfection here in this country and in other countries where we're starting to see those variants crop up. By the way, I just want to thank Prentice for that line, injecting a memory. It's just so poetic. But going back to people who've already had COVID, many people ask this question, and we absolutely recommend that you get vaccinated even if you have had COVID. And the reason why is actually two reasons. One is because we see that the immunity, that immune response you develop after getting the vaccine is just much more robust, stronger, more developed after getting the vaccine than having the disease. And that might seem really strange to some people, but that's something that we've actually seen with other vaccine preventable diseases as well. The other reason why, which is also really important, is that we hope to extend the duration, the length of your immunity by getting the vaccine. And now we are seeing that people who are as long out as 6 months, that's the latest that we have data, continue to have vaccine related immunity. So over 90% of individuals, or sorry, people who have been vaccinated, we see over 90% efficacy still 6 months later. So that is really encouraging. And that's another reason to take it, even if you have been infected.
Absolutely. And we thank Prentice. And Prentice, if you have any questions, as soon as we finish our next story, you can certainly ask your questions. We just want to make sure that we give Hope the opportunity to tell her story. Hope, it's your time. Thank you so much for sharing tonight. I think you have to unmute. Yeah. No, can't hear you yet. That's all right. You there?
Hello?
Yep, we hear you. Oh, nope, you're, sometimes when you touch it again, it pops, like, we don't hear you now. Let's try it again.
Hello, everyone.
There you are.
Long before the vaccine came out, after hearing so many stories of side effects, in my mind, I had no plans to take the vaccines. There are two reasons I'm hesitant in taking the vaccine. I've never taken the full vaccine and I never got sick. And what makes it worse is that I was given a pneumonia vaccine in February 2019, and I got very sick. After many calls to my primary care, I went in to see her, and I was told I had an allergic reaction, and I was out of work for 1 week. After many vaccines conversations, both at my workplace and my church webinars, weeks ago, I was still 50-50. After weeks of listening and seeing my brothers, sisters, coworkers, church family, and team members got their vaccine, I am about 80% leaning towards getting the vaccine. I've asked my primary care that I would rather get the Johnson & Johnson vaccines because it's one shot. Thank you so much for allowing me to share.
Hope, thank you. And that really thank you, because we appreciate your courage. And we know there are a lot of people out there who are still figuring it out, and we respect that. And that's why this conversation is so important. So let me throw the first question. There's many questions out of what Hope said, but Dr. Wiles, can we choose where we get the vaccine and what vaccine we want? That's one question, and I know Gloria will have many others.
So you can't choose which vaccine you're going to get. But I must say, before I even give a little more detail, thank you, Hope, for sharing, because you've raised many questions that a lot of individuals have had. And the main one is the allergies. And, you know, you've had a bad experience with the Pneumovax, it sounds like you've had in the past. And, you know, I can understand how that can be very concerning, getting another vaccine. And so one of the things that we tell all the patients who have had some allergic reaction and are a little bit uncomfortable is, you know, talk with the allergist and immunologist. That way we get a better understanding as to which particular component you're most likely allergic to. Because the key thing is, we would like you to get the vaccine, but we want to make sure we do it safely. And so in order to go through that process, you're going to have to make sure you take a few extra steps. When you get the vaccine, you're monitored for 15 minutes. For most patients, for those who have allergic reactions, 30 minutes. But in your case, you know, I think I would like to have a little bit more information as to what components you're particularly allergic to. And then finally, you don't get a choice. I mean, I know you said you wanted Johnson & Johnson, but we say whichever vaccine you get, that one is good. But I think your case might be a little bit more specialized, which talking with your healthcare provider, we could arrange something.
I just want to mention too, that for people who we know have some allergy or severe reaction to components of the mRNA vaccines, or just have a concern, like a significant concern for having a repeat of that with any of the with the mRNA vaccines, we do try as much as possible to get the Johnson & Johnson, but it is true that it really has to be a real concern that we have from your medical history that you might have an allergic reaction to the mRNA vaccine.
Thank you.
And I have a question again. Thank you so much, Hope, for sharing your story. And I'd like to raise a question based on one of the comments that Hope made. I've heard other people say, look, I never took the flu vaccine and I was just fine. So why do I need to take this vaccine? We can't hear you, Dr. Pierre.
Oh, I apologize. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. The answer is twofold. The answer that you take the vaccine for yourself and you take the vaccine for others, and that the same is true for flu. You know, with flu, many people have said, I don't get it. I've had many patients who say, I don't get it, I don't need it, and then have flu that year, have a really bad case, sometimes get hospitalized, and then say, okay, I'm converted, I'm gonna get this flu vaccine. And unfortunately, the same is the case here. If you haven't had COVID yet, that's wonderful. That's why we give the vaccine, to keep it that way. We don't want you to get sick. We don't want you to get hospitalized. We don't want you to have any of the severe complications. And even if you don't get hospitalized in COVID, more so than the flu, we know that there are long-term side effects that can be really disabling. And so we ask you to take this primarily for yourself. It is a personal decision to take it, don't get me wrong, but the real reason we ask you to take it is for yourself. And the second fold is for the people around you, the people in your community, the people who may not have the opportunity to take it yet because they're not eligible. Maybe they're children, they're younger, there may be other reasons why they have not yet taken the vaccine. We're doing this for ourselves, and we're doing this for our community so that we can get back to normal, or our new normal, and get back to running things.
Okay. I'm going to let this open up. I want to thank these three panelists who have shared their story from the Cory Johnson program community. Thank you for sharing your stories. Again, if you have a question, that's fine. Just signal us. Judelle, I guess they would signal us by.
Yes, they can. Thank you, Reverend Liz, and thank you, panelists and Reverend Dr. Gloria. You can submit your questions in the chat, or you can also raise your hand if you would like to unmute yourself. But again, please, if you do want to speak, raise your hand, and then we will call on you just to mitigate, everybody speaking at once.
Okay, and I see that we have a couple of hands up, so we're going to get with you really quickly. I just wanted to follow up because this is a question from Rosie, if Rosie doesn't mind, follow up to what we just said. How often are we going to have to take this vaccine? Do we know that yet? Is there some, like, we'll just take it for a year and then everything will be all right? Or do we not know that part of it? Dr. Wiles, I'll start with you on that.
I think right now we don't have the data to say we're going to need to take it yearly or how often. They're really doing a lot of research right now to give us that information to see, when we're going to, if and when. I would imagine, given the information that we're hearing about the variant, I think it's quite possible. So I don't want people to think that, this might never happen. I think it's a real possibility, but let's just wait to see what the data shows us.
Okay, Judelle, I'm going to let you help me call on, but I see Catherine Effie has a question. So Catherine, please just unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me, Reverend Liz?
We hear you, Catherine.
Yes, my thing is the vaccine for these children. What about the children? Because they're being called back into school, and yes, they need to be in school and be, do construction and and such, but they're not vaccinated. They're being tested, but they're not being, they can't get vaccinated. And the other thing is it going to be mandatory? Just like when you sign your child up for school, especially like kindergarten or daycare, but especially in kindergarten, you have to have this vaccine. Or how you have to have your your physicals and such, and you have to have such and such vaccine and this and that in order for your child to be enrolled in school. Is that going to be, this vaccine going to be mandatory for the children?
Great questions, Catherine.
That's another question. And
I'm going to take those two. I'm not trying to cut you off, but I want to make sure we don't miss any of your questions. So which doctor do you want to take that? Dr. Pierre?
I'm happy to take that. So there are studies now ongoing in younger children, ages 6 months to 11 years of age. We don't know when that information will come out, but right now Pfizer and Moderna are looking at those younger age groups to get a sense of how safe it is and how effective it is. So a few more months to information about that. We already have information about 11 to 16-year-olds. From both studies, we see that the vaccines are really effective, incredibly effective, 100% effective, and still safe in that 11 to 16-year-old age group. So that is all good news, but we don't yet have an emergency use authorization for those younger age groups. So right now, the children will not be vaccinated until the FDA has looked at that information to make sure that it is safe and effective for those age groups. I'm hoping that very soon, at least for the 11 to 16-year-olds, we'll have some instruction about that. The good news, other piece of good news though, is that we also know that although children can certainly get infected with COVID, we see that they get infected less, that they transmit less. There's been less in terms of school outbreaks. And so we still need to recommend to our kids that they physically distance, wear their masks, but it's less, we can hopefully do a little bit more to get them to that vaccine. And then the second part is whether it will be mandatory. We still don't have instruction about that yet because it's not yet approved, even in an emergency use authorization perspective for children. What we are seeing, and that might give us a clue of what might happen in schools, is that the universities are starting to mandate this for university students that are coming on campus. More and more, we hear about more colleges doing this. So the answer is maybe, we don't know yet, but it looks like potentially with what we see with universities, that might be something that school systems decide to do on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. I think it's kind of like making the road as we walk it, which we always talk about. That's what the government is doing. That's what the world is doing right now. We're just figuring this out as we go. Reverend Gloria, if you have a question, just go right ahead. I'm going to call on Andy. I see your hand is up, Andy.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate the forum and all of you participating. It's wonderful. My question has to do with I've been vaccinated, and I know that wearing the mask is what is needed, even though you're vaccinated, and I'm all good with that. But also, I know a lot of people, I think, are in question about that, like the reason. It's my understanding that the reason is that even though we are protected from the illnesses, we still can have the disease, have the virus, and then therefore be transmitters. So I just wanted clarity on that.
Whichever doctor wants to take that. Dr. Wiles, do you want to take that? If we wear the mask, we've had the vaccine, why do we have to wear the mask?
Yes, Andy, great question. We get that all the time. But there are a couple of things that I want to point out. First, remember that we still don't have a large percentage of the population vaccinated yet. And so until we get to herd, you all heard us talking about herd immunity, where, we have enough people vaccinated so that we can protect those that haven't been able to. We're not quite there yet. I mean, today I heard in one of the meetings with the DPH that we're close to getting to 2 million people in Massachusetts vaccinated, which is impressive, right? But in other states, they're not quite at that point yet. So until we get everyone vaccinated, it's really important that we continue with this public health measures. Those that are vaccinated, we do know that the vaccines help to prevent severe illness and death, but there's still research that's been done as to whether or not you can be asymptomatic and transmit the disease. And so until we have more data to clear everyone from taking their mask off, I think we need to continue to wear the mask, again, to protect ourselves and those around us. But I'll tell you, the CDC is looking at this closely because they understand people are already dealing with so much pandemic fatigue that they want to get rid of the mask, but we want to do it safely.
Okay.
And I offer this to an interesting observation, given that we've been masking and distancing. What's also interesting is that we have seen a fraction of the flu that we typically see during the flu season. Is how many people have had a cold, right? How many people have been bothered by allergies? And we think that that has something to do with the masking and with the distancing. So as inconvenient as it is, we may be rethinking this.
You mean that we would all have to wear masks the rest of the—
Well, we may be thinking, given that what has happened is since we've been masking, that we have not seen nearly as much flu as we typically do. I suspect that on this call, there are many of us who have a bout of flu, or we know someone with flu, but we haven't seen it. And people think that that's been one of the unexpected benefits, if you will, with having worn the mask and practiced the kinds and washing hands and doing the kinds of things that we've been doing. So it makes you want to think about it.
Yeah, I don't know, Gloria, but okay, if you say so. And Ramona's hands are up, but I think Voy has had your hand up for a while. So Voy, if you're there, please, welcome. Good to see you.
Well, nice to see you. I have a couple of questions. One, first of all, I'm fully vaccinated. I took the Moderna vaccine, and I'm very glad I did. The first thing I wanted to ask is, are we going to have to take booster shots, say 6 months from now, or so on and so forth? Whether or not we're going to have to take that, that has reference to how long does the vaccine last? Second, I want to ask, is there any national plan to deal, and I guess we're trying to achieve herd immunity, okay? But we have, with these anti-maskers and vaccine resistors and so on and so forth, it's going to be very difficult to achieve herd immunity when people refuse to wear masks and won't take the vaccine. So is there any national plan to achieve herd immunity other than trying, we know what we have to do to achieve it, but how are we going to get there if people refuse to take the vaccine or wear masks?
Thank you. Who wants to take those questions, Dr. Pierre?
Sure. So like Dr. Wiles said, we don't know in terms of the duration of immunity with this vaccine, how long it will last. Will it be once a year? Will it be every 2 years? Will it turn out to be something like the flu shot? We're not sure yet. But your question about the booster is interesting for another reason, which is the variants that you're talking about. Even if we have long lasting duration of this vaccine, of immunity from the vaccine, these variants are another reason why we're saying that we still need to wear the mask, even if we are fully vaccinated, because we they know that some of these variants might be able to get around the immunity that we have from the vaccine. That is not a reason not to get vaccinated. It is actually a reason to get vaccinated as soon as possible to prevent the replication from the spread of these variants in our community. But it might be that we may need to take a booster, not just because of the duration, but because of these variants that we have. And to your point about what the national strategy is to get people immunized as fast as possible, I feel like the administration is coming up with something every day, trying to boost supplies of vaccines made, distributed, delivered. They're moving up the allocation nationwide. Now, we already said that we were going to, in Massachusetts, open up the doors to everyone by April 19th, but the national government had been a little bit behind. Then they moved it up. The same way people in the Black community have felt really strong about going to our community, making sure that people who are structurally vulnerable get information about this. They're now realizing that actually the issue wasn't really hesitancy in our community. It wasn't just hesitancy, it's a lot about access. The most hesitancy is now we're seeing in Republican white voters. And so they're doing, it's like a parallel world. They're getting that ready to launch in terms of information to the anti-vaxxers and the anti-maskers as well, to get information where it's needed. And so I would say, like, every a step of the way in terms of opening up eligibility, people are trying to figure out what the information is for that group.
Can I just add, because Chandel has put a question in the chat, and Reverend Gloria, you and I talked about that. Dr. Pierre just mentioned some of the groups that are not taking the vaccine. For people who are traumatized and feeling stuck and hearing all these things, they know in their mind it might be the best thing to do, she says, but they can't convince their bodies. How would you help support or coach them? And Reverend Gloria, you and I kind of were talking about this morning a little bit, but I'll open it up to everybody, but I just wanted to start with Gloria.
Well, I think, first of all, it's important for people to be able to name that they've experienced trauma. And obviously that's the critical work of Cory is providing support for so many of us who've known trauma. And then I think it's very important in these kinds of sessions to have people be able to talk about it and stay in conversation. Don't dismiss anyone or overlook anyone. Stay in conversation for as long as it takes.
Great. Anybody else want to add to that? Colleen Sharka, you're with us and you're working, obviously Colleen is the director of this program. In case you don't, I think we all know that, but in case you don't know that, would you add to anything about that? What do you tell people in the program, Colleen? And you need to unmute if you're going to answer that.
Yes, thank you, Reverend Liz. You know, Chandel, as usual, is right on in bringing up something so important because, you know, you might find that so many are sharing on our Can We Talks weekly, and I'm hearing it tonight in some ways. You might find that you're thinking in your head, I'll go and get this vaccine, I'd like to get more information. But every time you actually try to go do it, either ask questions or actually start to make an appointment, people are telling us that they're having the panic attacks and they're having different, reactions in their bodies, and their hearts are racing and their palms are sweating and then they can't sleep. And it's a trauma response. And it can be either from something that happened to them medically before, or even, connecting with historical trauma, because we know that you can have trauma symptoms from things that you didn't directly experience with historical trauma. So imagine all the reasons why this might be true. And it's just so important to name it, just like Reverend Gloria just said, so that people can learn more about trauma, learn more about what's going on, so that they can then find some way to intervene for themselves to get the vaccine if that's something they want to do.
Okay. Doctors, do you have anything to add, or we can?
I wanted to add that I think one thing that's really important as a physician, I find spending time with the patients that really have a little bit more difficulty navigating these issues, just talking with them, building a stronger relationship with them really helps them to make these difficult decisions. And sometimes, doctors might not have as much time, but I think time and a strong relationship really helps us to move forward a little bit stronger and better, because patients feel comfortable with the relationship and also the information. So it's about time, transparency, just giving as much information and really just meeting people where they are. I think those are really important points in helping us.
Lisa, you have been so patient. Lisa J, your hand is up, your emoji hand. Do you have a question?
Yes, this is a question for the doctors. I actually have friends who work in the pharmaceutical industry there in Boston. And one of my friends, she does safety for a pharmacy company. And she was telling me that when you develop a vaccine, the vaccine developers, whatever they're called, the scientists, take into account possible variants of the disease coming out. So I guess maybe I misunderstood her because that's not my field. But I guess I'm just wondering, I have already taken my first shot, but I am a bit concerned about these different variants that are coming out, because I did see on the news something today about in South Africa, the Pfizer vaccine. So I don't know if you could speak to that, if that's something we should be concerned about, or if these companies is that what the booster is going to be, if there is a booster? I don't know if that makes sense. Thank you.
Good question.
That's a great question. So let me just give you a little bit more for background. So we know viruses are always changing their forms, and that's when we end up with mutations. So, whenever there's any kind of virus, and a good example I like to use is the flu. Each year you have to get a new flu shot. And the reason is because it changes from year to year. So you have that in your mind when you're developing these vaccines. So they're thinking about it, but you never know what the variant is going to be at any particular time. You anticipate it, but you can't really plan really hardcore for exactly what it's going to be. In this particular case, we know that, we had a certain genetic code for the coronavirus. And so we developed the vaccine based on what we knew at the time. As you can see, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, they were developed before we now have the variant, which is a little different from when we have the Johnson & Johnson, because it was developed in a time when we were seeing more of the variant. So the vaccine, when it was tested with the variant present. Now, the good news is the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, and I know they're still looking at it, they say the vaccines are still good for the variants that's out there. So to answer your question, I would say I would encourage you to get the second dose for whichever of the vaccines you're getting. But as we talked about earlier, you might need to get another booster later on, because we're going to be looking at the variants now in a different environment.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes,
Okay. I just wanted to let you know that I agree completely with what Dr. Wiles has mentioned, and the information that you were just mentioning about the South African variant that's in the news today just shows that, yes, there is a little bit of breakthrough that they're seeing with that variant, more than with the dominant strain that we've seen before. But we're still not seeing severe disease from that South African variant. We're still not seeing death from that South African variant in people who have been fully vaccinated, who might get a mild case of the COVID infection with the variant. And so there are strong reasons to take this vaccine, even with the variants. Absolutely.
Okay. Hope, and then Kadriana. Hope?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Waz, I wanted to say thank you for when you say speaking with your primary care, and just having that relationship goes a long way for me with my primary care, because she had promised that she would try to get me the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So I'm praying on that. My question is, with my underlying conditions, with Johnson & Johnson, if I was to get that, would that be enough for me, my underlying conditions I have?
Yes, I would say the Johnson & Johnson, would work just as well as any of the other vaccines that you would, you can't get because of whatever it's going on. But I think the Johnson & Johnson would be just as good.
Thank you.
Kadriana?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having this session. My question is around Mrs. Henrietta Lacks. I watched a video and it mentioned that Mrs. Lacks' cells are being used in the creation of the vaccine. And I was wondering if that is true. And also if there has been a formal apology by the government and to Mrs. Lacks, as far as the government using her cells and distributing them worldwide without her permission, without the permission of her family. And the reason why I mentioned this is because for me, that is one of the reasons why I initially didn't want to get the shot. The lack of accountability as it relates to Mrs. Lack's situation, and the fact that from what I understand, from what I read, her family was living in abject poverty, but the medical institutions throughout the world were benefiting from Mrs. Lack's cells. So I'm wondering if her cells are being used, if there has been an official apology from the government, and also is the spiritual community involved in making sure that that is happening?
I'm happy to take the medical response for that. So the HeLa cells, which is the name given to Henrietta Lacks cells, have not been used in the creation, testing, development of these vaccines. So there are no human tissue in any of these vaccines, and Henrietta Lacks cells were not used to the best of my ability or knowledge in the creation of these. As far as what you're talking about, reconciliation is a very important concept when we think about what we need to move forward as Black people, as people who have been disenfranchised in general from the medical establishment. Now, Johns Hopkins was the university that originally harvested those cells. They have apologized for that. I think it's tricky, and I think it's beyond me to talk about whether the government has a role in apologizing for it, because the place where these cells were first taken was Johns Hopkins University. They have done some work towards reconciliation, including with Henrietta Lacks' family. For example, establishing a foundation and scholarships for some of her descendants, and for others who live in the Baltimore area around the hospital. You can always ask whether that's enough, and I don't think I'm the right person to answer that question. But I think the larger question about reconciliation for all of the generational trauma that we've talked about, as well as the bias that we face today in medical systems, is something that I think has been left unaddressed. But as far as those cells are concerned, there has been some movement towards that. We never know whether it's enough.
Thank you.
I think the underlying question that I would have you respond to is again, people have said, look, given our experience, we have not been able to trust the healthcare system. Why should we be trusting them with this vaccine, especially given that it came out so quickly?
So I will take that one. I know that the mistrust is there, but for us in the medical community, I can say, especially with COVID, I think that the spotlight has been placed on what's been happening in our community, and at least people are giving us more attention to address some of these concerns. And of course, it might not be enough, but I think it's a start, and we have to continue to move that ball forward. But with regards to the vaccines, I know people keep saying, oh, it happened so quickly, but in particular for the messenger RNA technology, that did not just happen a year ago. They have been using this technology for many years. In fact, about 10 years, they were trying it with Ebola. They were trying it with Zika. They were trying it with other viruses, but they were not successful. However, they were successful when they tried it with the coronavirus. So things were able to move faster than we have seen in the past. It happened also very quickly because there was a lot of people working together, which is unusual. Usually people are siloed in their own lab, but we're in the midst of a pandemic, so people were able to come together, and there was also lots of money being poured into this because money makes things happen. And so people were working together, getting results quickly, and we also had a lot of people who had the disease that we were able to do the different phases fast. So, it's fast because of what was happening happening and the groundwork that was laid many years ago.
Any other comments or statements on this? I wonder, Gloria, any of you, do you see the health, and maybe this is an unfair question to doctors, so Gloria, I'll ask you. You're a doctor, but you're also a preacher. Do you see the healthcare industry learning its lesson? Because, you know, we've been here, well, we haven't been here to this extent, but we've been here before with institutions, you know, a reckoning, but it seems like we don't learn our lessons. And so history repeats itself in some ways. Do you see this moment as a real reckoning for the healthcare? And does anybody, industry?
I'm going to say cautiously optimistic that in fact this is a moment. I've had a number of conversations with health institutions around the city, and I have the sense that people are genuinely committed to making the deep changes that are required with accountability. So I say one of the reasons that we want people to get this vaccine so that we can get this pandemic behind us is because we need all hands on deck to advocate, to write letters, to operate in the streets, to hold the people that we just elected accountable, to ensure that there is the kind of equity that redresses the trauma that we've experienced and gives us reason to know that we can live through this and live beyond this well.
Okay, thank you. Ramona, you have had that little emoji up for a long time. Your question?
My question is that my last vaccine was on March the 23rd, and I'm supposed to get a shingle shot. Do I have to worry about both of them interacting with each other and what I want to say is, do I have to worry about the shingle shot messing with the vaccine shot that I got?
I can answer that. You should be safe to get it 2 weeks after your last COVID shot. So it sounds like you're in the clear for that, and you do not have to worry about interactions with that. That's a great question.
Oh, okay.
A really good question.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question?
Good afternoon. I guess as a younger person, I'm curious to know, with people that have all of these health issues, heart disease, cancer, whatever type of sickness, why isn't the hospitals or the government pushing the statistics of the tests done on people that have all of these underlying diseases? One. And two, if people aren't familiar with the Johnson & Johnson company in general, and like their recalls on certain products and things like that, what is pushing you doctors? What is making you guys trust Johnson & Johnson to say, okay, the vaccine, you know, their vaccine specifically might turn out better than their baby powder that, you know, might causes cancer to some people? Or, you know, why should we trust that product specifically with Johnson & Johnson? Like, we understand that that is what's available, but is it worth it? Is it good for us? Are you guys just saying, hey, take this because it's available, it might help? That's my questions.
Okay.
Gabrielle, thank you for that question. Those are huge questions. So thank you for asking them. So the first part of your question is, why aren't hospitals paying attention to the people who are most at risk for the severe effects of COVID, so make sure that they get vaccinated? You know, I can't speak for the entire government, but I will say many hospitals, including my own at Boston Medical Center, you know, months in November, we were looking through our risk of higher risk people who are more likely to have the severe effects of COVID. So we were looking and we're saying, okay, how many of these people, ensuring that we could get out our health notices to the people who really needed them in a multiple ways of communication. So we didn't just stop at a letter or an email. We went through multiple different methods to try and capture those people. And I am sure that many hospitals, including Dr. Wiles, have done similar work to try and get everyone that was at higher risk. And then again, try those same communications to get to everyone as time goes on. We want to make sure that we have the best outcomes, especially at Boston Medical Center, where we have a higher proportion of underrepresented or systemically marginalized people, including Black and brown people, as our patients. The second question is a little harder to answer, but it actually is something that we have been feeling very passionately about. I have told my patients, I will not shill for any drug company. I will do the work. I will look at the results. I will look at the way the studies have been constructed to ensure that they are safe and effective when I make that recommendation, and I stand by that. And many other organizations have done the same, including those that care for Black and brown patients. Looking at the data, looking at the way the studies were constructed, looking at the side effects, we know that these studies have to go through a rigorous process to show what they have done, and it is not an empty process. So we look to a lot of the information that they have given, a lot of other groups who have analyzed, but we also do the work ourselves and look at the safety and the efficacy. So yes, Johnson & Johnson has a history of ovarian cancer associated with the baby powder, but other companies have a history of other things as well. I think we would say for many companies that there's always this history of something in the background. We have to look to what can we take from the system that works for us, and we find that it's safe and effective. We want to recommend that.
I want to, I hate to do this because we have lots of other questions in our chat, but I want to honor our panelists, particularly our doctors' time. And I want to thank our doctors because our doctors are actually working on the disease right now. So it's not like they just sit around and wait to go on Zoom calls. And so Dr. Wiles and Dr. Pierre, thank you for taking the time to answer this community's questions. Very important and very powerful questions. We really appreciate your giving us the time. I want to thank again Ramona and Prentice and Hope for being courageous enough to share your stories. We learn from that. That helps us all. So thank you. And of course, Dr. Gloria, you are the bomb. And I just thank you for your wisdom and your light and being with us again tonight. This has been a really good conversation, and if necessary, we will try to have another one because you are important, all of you. You have amazing value, invaluable as human beings and as contributors to this society and this community. So we want to answer your questions. And if you still have questions or concerns, we get that. And we'll be here to try to help you navigate this. We want to
Reverend Liz, can I just do one public health piece? Is just to really encourage people around our young people that at this point, 74 over the past week, 74 of the new positive cases in Boston were of people under the age of 39. So we really do need our young people to come on board, have those conversations, encourage them to get vaccinated.
Thank you, Reverend Gloria. And we have done at least one conversation with high school seniors around this very, I saw a very disturbing story that a 21-year-old had to be intubated. And I thought, how sad for somebody so young to be in that situation with anyway, thank you for reminding us of that. We also want to remind you all to continue to join us virtually every night on Thursday nights from 6:30 to 7:30 for Can We Talk? Community conversations on trauma and healing. To learn more about that, you see RPC Social Impact CTR, just one CTR.org. And then we'll ask you to join our emailing list to receive information on our weekly program offerings by emailing CJP Director Colleen Sharka at rpcsic.org. And we'll also put her email in the chat. Again, we will keep talking as long as there are questions because this is important. It is a matter of life and death. We love our community and we're going to fight for it. So thank you for being here tonight. Be safe and we'll see you again. God bless. Good night, everybody.